Hello and welcome to Scale Up Your Security Telemetry. This is Anton Chuvakin with Google Cloud and Chronicle. I want to highlight some of the challenges and some of the solutions that organizations face in their battles to optimize and improve their security operations and improve threat detection. I want to start with trying to give a bit of a landscape around threats, security operations, and highlight some of the things that matter today. A lot of the things we encounter in this space are artifacts of the past eras. We have to deal with issues that are inherited by companies and that have been dealt with for years. However, there are also new things that our predecessors doing security operations have not seen. I also wanted to highlight the role of the cloud as both something to monitor, somewhere to detect threats in, and also an enabler for modern security operations. And then next, I wanted to cover the details around Chronicle, the modern security analytics platform that gathers some of the advantages of the cloud to enable you to detect threats in both on-premise and cloud environments. Afterwards, I want to highlight some of the practical recommendations that you can follow whether you are a Chronicle customer or not. Now, why do so many security presentations start from a threat landscape? To me, I do that because I want to get on the same page with everybody. I wanted to highlight some of the things we see with other organizations and some of the challenges you face today. Now, every security presentation that I've seen, almost everyone I've seen in my entire career, starts from a discussion of badness. May it be hackers, intrusion, breaches, crimeware, the words may change, but the approach does not. Ultimately, the security profession is driven by the threat. We are driven by what the bad guy is trying to throw at us. In that sense, security is a unique domain of knowledge. A lot of the things we do in security are quite different to what's done in IT because much of what we do is about dealing with what an outsider, a threat actor, or a malware is about to throw this way. Why is it like this? What are some of the things that would happen in the near future? Now, some of you may think, hey, it's a painfully obvious question. This is a domain of security. We protect against hackers, attackers, malware, all that. However, there's actually a specific reason, in my opinion, as to why it's the case. Now, our world, unfortunately, looks like this. This is my very unscientific visual that shows changes in the number of security analysts, security engineers, security professionals in general, and the amount of stuff, amounts of technology that needs securing. Think, those of you who started your security career many years ago probably remember the time when you had to secure servers in a data center, maybe web servers, maybe file servers, and essentially nothing else. This was perhaps in the late 90s or maybe even before that for some of the more enlightened ones of you. Now, today, we face a fairly dizzying array of technologies to secure from, well, the same servers, going all the way back to mainframes and technologies that predate servers, going all the way back to 80s or maybe 70s. But we also have cloud computing, mobility, we have Internet of Things, we have all the analytics pipelines, we have the emerging AI. We have a lot of technologies within the domain of digital technology, spanning IT and OT, operational technology, control systems, and IoT, Internet of Things. In essence, what we have today, and we expect to continue having this, is that the number of technologies, systems, things to secure would keep growing. And most everybody agrees that it would keep growing faster than the number of security people. So many of the challenges with breaches, badness, alert overload, missed attacks stem from the fact that we just don't have enough people. So what can possibly be done to help it? You can automate things, but we'll touch on this. But the problem is that this is the world we live in. And in this world, we do have an increasing amount of things we have to secure. How do we ever hope to win the battle? We'll talk about it. Now, in many presentations, people talk about threats. And today, I wanted to kind of offer my own spin on this and say these are popular security incident types. Now, admittedly, in recent years, ransomware have become a big thing, and it's been a good number of years since it became a scourge that it is now. Phishing attacks continue to be a big part of modern security incidents. If you look at any industry reports that cover items that were involved in breaches and attacks, phishing would almost always make an appearance. Now, the data theft, whether it's payment data, valuable corporate data, private citizens' data, is still there. While ransomware is a type of malware, we still see a fair number of other malware, web malware, traditional viruses, and Trojans. Denial of service attacks continue to be interesting, and this is the type of an attacks I've dealt with in my past life as an analyst. The interesting bit about this is that while some consider it to be a nuisance, others consider denial of service to be a business-killing attack. Now, to me, I hesitate when I put insider threats on any kind of a top popular list of attacks. I do see organizations that are deeply concerned with insider threat, and these may be well in the cloud or on premise. Insider threat continues to be more of a low burning issue for some, but there are organizations that are quite heavily focused on insider threat. So I wanted to kind of highlight as number 6 my unauthorized access and insider threat challenges. So to me, this is the list of things that keeps modern chief security officers asleep at night or maybe nervous during the day. Now, there may be other threats and issues that you deal with in your business or in your industry, but these are kind of top popular issues. And if you're doing the monitoring, if you're doing security operations planning, you're probably focusing somewhere on these issues. Now, the spectrum of attacks does go all the way up. And of course, there are rare but highly damaging attacks, all the so-called state-sponsored or just top-tier cybercrime actors. There is a type of a threat that it shows up in the news for sure, sometimes in organizational security monitoring dashboards, but threats that, for example, target Google, going back many years ago, many of them are top-tier threats. So while we talk about popular threats, the reason I want to show this slide is while you may fight malware every day, it would probably be useful to keep aware of the top-tier threat actors that are very much human and not automated systems that can be good at computers and at people. In essence, when you focus on popular threats, don't forget that there is a type of a threat that may affect your organizations that's very far out or up from that spectrum. This reminder would help us to contextualize some of the security analytics requirements we'll get to. Now, security operations challenges specifically, challenges that SOCs deal with, very often focus on these things I highlighted in the slide. Now, if you recall the slide with a visual, with my linear graph, you do realize that keep acquiring and keeping talented people to do security operations is challenging. Now, there are many other things that come up. Obviously, the growth of spectrum, technologies, complexity of IT, mixture of new and old IT, addition of OT and IoT, all puts additional stress to security operations. Now, number 5 on that slide is kind of self-inflicted because in many cases, in my experience, security teams and security operations teams aren't really friends with some IT operations teams. Now, at a mature, enlightened organizations, they are. But in some of the mainstream organizations, they're not. Think patching, think asset management, think DevOps challenges. Security and IT does have an occasional friction point. To me, these are important to consider when you're planning threat detection and monitoring of security operations. Now, one thing to note is that many of these challenges are similar, at least philosophically, conceptually similar to what we had 5 or 10 years ago, but they're definitely bigger. There's a lot more IT, there's a lot more security tools because there are more alerts, and there's a lot more of the opinion that we should deploy the latest technology rather than to refine and improve operations. I think that's enough of the landscape, frankly. I think that I presented a few slides here to kind of get on the same page with the audience in terms of what an organization may deal with. Now, cloud computing, by the way, as I promised, highlights and shows up as both something to monitor systems deployed in the cloud, microservices, other cloud components, but also as an enabler of security monitoring. That's where we get to Chronicle. Now, you may not like another challenges slide, but I wanted to present this particular visual to kind of highlight the comparison between how Chronicle security analytics platform is built versus some of the existing tools. I can call them legacy. I would say in IT security, if something is more than 10 years old, it's definitely legacy. The idea is some of the technologies that were born before the cloud are a little bit difficult to scale, or they may scale physically, but they would not scale economically. And at the same time, there are always challenges with telemetry, types of data being incomplete. Now, when we are deploying a security monitoring tool in 2020, we would be seeing things that didn't exist 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And to me, this matters because I want to focus on detecting the popular threats, but also I want to focus on detecting the modern threats. I want my security analytics platform to grow with the threats. And I think that's occasionally missing from the traditional tools. So enough of that. I want to go deeper into Chronicle to highlight some of the advantages of our approach. Now, many companies, many organizations deploy with a mission statement or with a high-level vision. Many of them are somewhat generic. I wanted to briefly point at the Chronicle vision of building a planet-scale system for storing and analyzing enterprise telemetry and making it useful for detection, hunting, and response. Now, this to me is very crisp. And to me, when I joined Chronicle and then ultimately Google Cloud, that was a big part of the appeal. Because to me, as an analyst, I wanted to look at things that scale economically, that cover modern use cases, can cover traditional use cases, and can also cover many of the security operations challenges, detecting, nowadays threat hunting, responding to issues. So to me, this is a way to do that. Chronicle to me is a way to build a modern security analytics platform rather than just to try evolving a SIEM slowly. That matters. Some of you in the audience may have deployed security in information event management tools or SIEMs for a good number of years. And there's a long history of fairly challenging deployment scenarios, as we learned from the previous slide. We wanted to build a platform that's easy, that's deployable, and it does leverage unique Google assets like threat intelligence and, of course, search speed. No debate here. Now, I want to briefly attract your attention to the architecture of the platform. Now, those of you who have seen security information event management tools or log management tools may recognize some of the components. I wanted to point at some things that are different. Now, for the SIEM tools that were built in the 90s or in the early 2000s, threat detection and incident investigation, and of course a few other use cases were central. Threat hunting, however, was not. Chronicle is one of the few SIEMs built with threat hunting as a first-class use case for a platform. It's kind of a group of use cases rather, not just one use case. So to me, the ability to search and rapidly pivot and refine signals while you're pursuing a pretty subtle or a thin indicator of an attack is important. And I don't want to just rely on search or on reports or on rule-based detection for doing that. I want my interactive and pivoting search platform that's instant. There are a few other things that are interesting here. Chronicle makes certain types of telemetry like DNS and DHCP logs to also be a first-class data source. Now, I've dealt with SIEMs for, at this point, for almost 20 years, for 18 years to be exact. And at this point, I've seen people not put DNS, not put DHCP logs, not put file hashes in their SIEMs because they're just overwhelmed. In case of Chronicle, you would want to put this data in, and it would not cost you anything. I'll get to the question point in a second. Of course, today's security operations is unthinkable without heavy reliance on threat intelligence. In case of Chronicle, you would have, if you have your own threat intel, you have public sources, some of them are more noisy than others. All this threat intel data flows into the platform without any challenges, and it will be cross-correlated to logs in a few ways. I'll explain that in the next slide. Now, this slide is probably more useful to people who have dealt with threat detection, security monitoring, threat investigation challenges, and or deployed similar tools. I wanted to hit a few points here, some in more detail than others. First, even though I'm a technologist, I want to start with disruptive economics. Now, what does disruptive economics really mean? Today, it means a pricing model for a security monitoring tool that's different. Now, some of you are used to seeing tools that deploy and price based on data volume collected, or the number of data sources, the number of log sources, or on the number of components deployed. There's a lot of complexity, and of course, there's also a charge for data retention if you're storing data for a year, for example. So Chronicle launched with a pricing model that runs off the number of employees, people, not data sources, not data points, not events per second. Now, this means that you have fully predictable pricing. And predictable just means if you have a large company, you count your employees, and that's the price. Now, this is incredibly liberating. Let me tell you that, for a security solution. The reason for that is that a lot of tools are priced by data volume or some derivative of that. And that means you have to balance your security requirements with the fear that you would overrun the license, you'd incur costs. And in case of Chronicle, you kind of pay a fixed price per year. And by the way, that fixed price includes 1 year of log retention. Not 30 days, not 90 days, not 180 days, a full year. And you can pay the same and you'd get data retained for more than that. To me, this is also an important point. Now, keeping data for a year isn't that hard. It's expensive for some other people, but it's not hard. Now, how about searching across petabyte of data at sub-second speed? I'm going to move into the bottom item on the slide. Admittedly, very few people at Google are impressed by search speed because, hey, Google can search internet at the same speed. Now, in the security operations threat detection space, instantaneous searches over petabytes of data just aren't that common. Or in fact, if they do happen to somebody, it's usually at the cost of hardware measured in millions, if not tens of millions. Chronicle is built in a way that it can search structured data in under a second over any volume of data. And we really mean that. To me, when I first learned that, it was a huge, huge innovation. Even though, again, the team that presented to me, the Chronicle team at the time, didn't really act as if it's a big deal. Of course, they're from Google. Now, to me, being able to search a petabyte of data at sub-second speed does enable a lot of investigative hunting and detection use cases in a very clean way. Let me hit a few more points on the slide, and then I'm going to go into details on two of them. We also noticed that in the past, with tools that collect the data but don't make it useful, the quality of data inside a security monitoring platform is a big challenge. We decided to focus very heavily on having clean, enriched, cross-correlated data on our platform. Here on the slide is highlighted as intelligent data fusion. That means we can collect the data and we can make it useful for security operations use cases by connecting different data pieces. Firewall data connected to EDR data, connected to server data, connected to other data sources you collect, and of course to DNS and DHCP, as I highlighted. We can also use this enriched data to cross-correlate with threat intelligence. And we can do that both historically and in real time. I'm going to make another point about this in the next slide. Also, we decided to build a detection engine into this platform that can detect threats that are modern, that appear today. Of course, we would cover the popular threats on that slide, but we also want to be future-proof. So if new types of threats appear, we will be able to write detection content to catch them. Of course, self-managed is a no-brainer here because it comes with the cloud model. Chronicle, after all, is a SaaS platform. So in that sense, we don't suffer from some of the complexities of on-premise SIEMs. That's an obvious point. How do customers use it? I want to highlight this very briefly because in many regards, we are deployed to extend another solution. You may have a tool that you use for compliance reporting, for certain types of workflow, but you're not handling the volume well. We do see Chronicle deployed with other tools to enhance this. Of course, we also see situations where Chronicle is deployed as their SIEM, as the main security information event management tool for their SOC, for their security operations team. And in this case, they migrate from a historical SIEM to our platform. In the middle, you see another scenario. In this case, we do see customers deploy Chronicle on top of EDR. There are some popular EDR solutions that produce telemetry that's very useful for threat detection and investigation, but they don't actually retain it for a year. Now, you can refer to some of the writing we have done, Chronicle website, about how this is valuable. I want to highlight the fact that if you are investigating, there's nothing better than having super quick access to 1 year of data or more than that. Now, one thing I mentioned briefly is detection. And one of the big surprises for me when I first encountered Chronicle technology was that Chronicle relied a lot on threat intelligence and rules rather than, say, machine learning as some other vendors. Now, we do think that machine learning is a good approach for detection. However, we also think that for machine learning to work well, you have to learn from something, from real-world experiences of hunters, incident responders, and not just from the vendor labs. So we've deployed Chronicle with rule-based detection, with Intel-based detection that covers petabytes, can run on very high-quality enriched data that we have. So we can match to enriched data, say IP addresses or DNS names, even if threat indicators don't match verbatim. we also have a way to write detection logic that's not about writing queries, but about writing detection. Writing detections here means writing focused use cases to detect threats, not just extract data and then think what it means. This to me is kind of a big deal. YARA-L is our approach to this, and you can see the white paper on the site. There's a lot of content written on YARA-L and how it's evolving. I did want to very briefly remind you about the productivity that stems from sub-second responses of search. Again, my first encounter with the platform highlighted that if you have tens of gigabytes of data, hundreds of gigs or petabytes, the search speed would be the same. And that does allow you to run queries, run detection logic that is not constrained by performance. This to me is a very big point. I don't want my SOC to be in the performance optimization business. I want them to be in security business, threat detection business, not in, oh my God, my SIM is too slow business. I want them to run detection logic instantly. And Chronicle does enable that. Now, as a technologist, I am probably more inclined to talk about features, advantages, capabilities, detection logic. But for Chronicle, disruptive economics is kind of a big part of the attraction of the platform. To me, nobody was able to build a software as a service monitoring platform, a threat detection platform that does not rely on any volume pricing on data. Admittedly, some of the advantages you see here are inherent with any SaaS tools. No infrastructure setup costs and quick, rapid searches, but things like all the data you want collected at a fixed cost is unique. And to me, this eliminates many of the challenges that modern SOCs face. You want to have more data? Have more data. That's a decision that should be based on the merits and not on the costs. This to me is what's changing the landscape of some of the SOC operations that I've encountered, where you can include the data sources you want, EDR, deeper server telemetry, some of the cloud data sources, and not pay anything for any extra sources is hugely liberating. Now, if you're planning the deployment of our tool, of Chronicle, it's useful to highlight a few items when you're doing this. Now, we do have tools to support total cost of ownership analysis. I mean, admittedly, most vendors do that. But what you would see in our case is that many of the TCO calculations, many of the TCO arguments, because they derive their magic from the predictable pricing, decoupled from capacity, compute, number of things you run. So to me, this is a very big part of an attraction, as I pointed out. And again, some of the things you see on this slide are characteristics of all modern tools, like, for example, it relies on APIs. But some things on that slide are very uniquely Google. Of course, we rely on some of the threat intel that stems from Google's research and Google's teams that focus on identifying threat actors. But we also highlight things like a rapid delivery model, rapid deployment, and of course, sub-second searches over any source of data. To me, many of the clients and prospects who are looking at Chronicle have evaluated things similar to those on the slide and decided to go with the platform. Let's get to the final part of the presentation, namely the action items. I would hypothesize that many of the listeners have some form of security information event management tool or a log management tool, whether open source, commercial, whether software as a service or on-premise. Now, one thing to note is that if your approach today is heavily on-premise based, I think the time is coming to evaluate it. Now, I would not pretend that Chronicle is the only tool. There's maybe a set of half a dozen approaches, half a dozen tools, vendors that started to build software as a service, SIEM, software as a service threat detection tools. Back in my analyst days, I've looked at them and I found some of them promising, some of them not promising. The idea is that the on-premise approach starts to slowly lose the importance. And I would say if I'm planning my threat detection platform of the future, it would probably be software as a service. It would not be a legacy tool deployed on IaaS. It would not be a legacy tool deployed on-premise. It would be a native SaaS tool. Advantages and the future-proofness of such tool, if I may coin the term here, are just unmatched. Now, you may think that deploying SaaS-based, software as a service-based tools makes sense for cloud environments. And you would be right. However, my point is that it's also useful for on-premise environments. Some of the advantages of SaaS, lack of maintenance management, performance tuning, much faster content updates, much more rapid deployment of detection rule, normalization, other types of advantages are there, and they're inherent in SaaS. In case of Chronicle, they're coupled with super rapid speed, backwards and forward indicator matching, and of course, our unique threat detection language. Now, I did mention that Chronicle is a software as a service platform, and I mentioned some of the advantages of SaaS platforms for monitoring and threat detection. Now, there would be still a large group of organizations that would prefer some help, even with SaaS. Now, as I said, with SaaS, you don't need to operate the servers, performance tune, but you still need to do things associated with the typical security operations workflow. Respond to alerts, respond to incidents, perform threat hunting. What's useful to note is that Chronicle enables a decent number of managed security providers, or MDR providers, for managed detection and response. And those providers do take the last mile. They help you with alerts. They help you with refining what type of detection to do. They help you with figure out what threats you need to add to the list of the popular threats, which threats are focused on your business. So to me, the value of Chronicle for managed security providers is also huge because of the cost model, because of the detection content. So to me, the useful thing to keep in mind is that if your company thinks is not ready for deploying this, I personally doubt it, but if you are in that bucket, you can find a managed security services provider, an MDR provider that runs Chronicle. So you'd gain many of the advantages of the platform, but you'd also get help with running your SOC, running your security operations. Now, to conclude, I wanted to highlight the fact that Chronicle remains a growing platform. The product is fairly young, so there would be things that we'll have to build. We are still building the workflow system. We are still building a few other things around detection. And of course, we want to make our detection smarter by using machine learning and AI techniques. The idea here is that we have unique and strong advantages in the platform that I highlighted, but we also remain to be a work in progress to a large extent, as every good product is, frankly. So to me, what we invite you to do is not just to make use of Chronicle today, but to also grow with us. Thank you very much for listening.